Hello, I'm Carol Bowser, President of Conflict Management Strategies. I love helping people and organizations avoid the sucking vortex of pissed off and become more conflict competent. And I also love sharing knowledge. And I love talking about this stuff with people. So I wanted to spread the gospel of managing conflict and empowering people and do that out here so that way more people get an opportunity for tools, frameworks that they can go ahead and use at work and at home. Because conflict resolution skills are the skills that nobody taught you, everybody expects you to know. And if you use them consistently, deliberately, and obviously, it's a superpower. But I'm not the center of all knowledge in conflict resolution. In fact, I've got a kind of tribe of people that I talk with regularly, the people that I learn from, the people that inspire me. And I wanted to bring some of those people together for you. So that way you can get a few tips, tools, techniques, and maybe insights that you can put to use in your life and at work. And one of the people that came first to my mind is my dear friend and colleague, Jeanette Neiden. And Jeanette, we always say that I learned how to negotiate from her, and she learned how to mediate from me. And so I love mediation, but mediation and negotiation are kind of similar, but kind of different. When I mediate with people, I'm kind of neutral as to what the outcome is. I'm interested in helping people, and I help them with a structure, with a process, with maybe tips, tools, techniques to help them better advocate for themselves to try to reach a resolution. Well, mediation and lawyers advocate, but in a slightly different way. So, Jeanette, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and we can talk a little bit about how negotiation and mediation and all of those terms that we use, how they are helpful or sometimes how they get in the way. But who the heck are you? What do you
Yeah,
do?
who am I? Yeah. So I am Jeanette Neiden on negotiation, and I help non-lawyers negotiate complex contracts with accuracy, nuance, and confidence so that they, the non-lawyers, can reach agreements that are fair, balanced, and risk-free on behalf of their organizations. And we have a long history. We have 20 years together as professional colleagues and as personal friends and women business owners. And so a lot of our work does overlap, and yet people don't really understand how much of the mediation skills I teach my people who are negotiating, and then how much of the negotiation skills you incorporate as part of your mediation techniques.
Exactly. I thought it would be kind of interesting for us to be able to talk about the power and also the disempowerment of language. Because I think you and I both talk about, is it mediation? Is it negotiation? Is it coaching? Is it facilitation? Is it collaboration? Is it problem solving? And I think language limits us, that we kind of put things in a bucket and we fail to see that there are kind of universal skills involved in all of those things. How do you how do you see that in your negotiation work?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true that we do use those buckets, especially when you're talking within companies that have any sort of legal team. You know, a negotiation means one thing, and mediation means something else. You're now in an official dispute, and the lawyers have gotten involved, etc. And that's not what you do, and that's not what I do. So for me, it's about a back and forth communication aimed at reaching an agreement. It's just really simple. And I start all of my conversations with my clients, all training programs with, this is simply a back and forth conversation aimed at reaching an agreement. So it could be when you're facilitating, when you're mediating, when you're negotiating, when you're talking with the stakeholder, it could be any number of kinds of conversations.
One thing that I have poached from you with your permission, and I think it was from your first book. Um, I know that there was someone special
Negotiation
identified.
rules.
Yes. That's someone that a good friend was identified in the credits for that. But I feel this.
Yeah, that was you.
It was me. Um, uh, and I steal this all the time when I do training, or even when I'm do coaching, or I'm helping HR folks or managers, or being called in to like deal with, the bad juju stuff. And I stole this specifically from you, and it kind of talks about interests and issues and needs. But at the very top, I'll talk about, like, just because you're all working at the same place, just because you're in the same department, just because you have the same manager, or you have the same values, some of your needs are going to be the same. Some of them are going to be different, and some of them are going to be competing, and that's
Yeah.
okay. So I really love how you framed that up of identifying and acknowledging some are the same, some are different, and some are competing, because I don't think people think about that at all. They just think about that I find you a pain in the ass. You're an impediment to me or us getting what I want.
Yeah, no, it's really true. And we often focus on those competing interests to the detriment of all the interests that we have that are shared. And that's where we dig our heels in and we become positional. And my attitude is interests are a currency that can be traded. And if we can start talking about them as different forms of currency that have different weighted, some things are $1, some things are $5, some things might be $100, we can start trading them back and forth. We don't have to feel like we've given up our values in these back and forth conversations in order to try to get our needs met or to meet someone else's needs. We're simply trading interests back and forth until we get to a mutual agreement.
Yeah, and this goes back to that I taught you how to negotiate. No, I taught you how to mediate. You taught me how to negotiate. Now, see, even I merge them together because I think of them as kind of formats and all different
Yeah.
ways to have discussions about what people need and how they maybe see their needs blocked. And I always go back to that. And one of the things that I think is really powerful about you and I in the model of mediation, because there are many, many models of mediation. And as a side note, you and I both know, you talk about mediators and even negotiators, and people get into very deeply entrenched positional arguments of what is the correct way to do it. But we also, at the training that we did, was what are people's needs, what are their interests, and kind of what are their values. And I think also what was different about what we do, we recognize that it's a high likelihood that there is an ongoing relationship, because we know that, like, how people feel treated, how the decision is made during the decision making
Yeah.
process, people will remember, and people will
Yeah.
hold grudges and things.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a true story. So I was at the King County Dispute Resolution Center. So when I was learning to mediate, I was both at the King County and the Pierce County, and that's you and I worked at the Pierce County Center for Dispute Resolution. So when I was at King County, I did this, advanced interest workshop to get ready to do more advanced types of mediations. And the instructor was talking to us about different interests and things that we hold really dear. And she talked about autonomy. And I put autonomy at the top of my list. And this woman who is also a lawyer, who came out of a big firm life, just sort of did a head snap. And she's like, autonomy. And she had a very negative reaction towards me wanting autonomy as one of my top needs, period. I mean, this is a foundational need, whether I'm a parent, I'm a partner, whether it's in my business partnership, I am autonomous. And I looked at her and I said, well, that's why I left the firm and started my own practice, my own business. And I think it's that sense of being offended because someone's number one need or interest isn't your number one need or interest, is somehow like looked down upon. Like, how could you possibly think autonomy? Well, yeah, if you're at one of the nation's top five largest law firms, there is no such thing as autonomy until you're probably in your 70s, you know? But if you're a woman business owner and you're starting up your own company, then that's all you are, is an autonomous free agent to go out and capture business. And I think about that a lot in the negotiation trainings that I do between customers and suppliers, where customers automatically demonize the supplier. They're always wrong and can never see their own fault in performance failures, but also in suppliers and how they treat customers as just piggy banks. Like, I'll just do a change order and get more money from them. And that is kind of setting up that adversarial relationship, then also takes into account that their interests are not totally aligned, and then they automatically see the other person as the enemy.
Yeah, and I see that in at the workplace, and that's kind of very interpersonal of like what's going on here. What are the needs and the interests that are they're similar, and to say, you know, to avoid demonizing it, it could just be that it's very different, and it could
Right.
be that the culture or the work environment
That's
isn't
right.
designed to meet that particular need, or they may want to, but just can't. And that's just one of the things that I find is just really kind of fascinating, whether it's an interpersonal relationship or a contract or business, or how do I manage up? If we can think, you and I automatically go toward what are the needs, what are the interests, what are the values? And I always say that at the top, there is a conflict and tension. There's always expectations, and generally it's unmet expectations. And then underlying that is unarticulated assumptions, the assumptions that how contracts do, what's a good boss, what's a bad boss, what's a good parent, what's a bad parent, what's a
Yeah.
psycho, coworker. And then
Yeah.
underneath that is what are the core values that are at play.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you and I have a radar screen for that, and those are the things that we are looking for, because we know if people can't articulate it, they just kind of vomit out blaming and shaming and accusation, which is really hard because to use, it's hard. You don't want to negotiate with the devil. It's the principle of the thing. And that when we
Yeah.
demonize people like that, we then justify stonewalling. Now, you have an
Yeah.
interesting comment about stonewalling. And I think and let's talk a little bit about different forms of stonewalling, which can really get in the way of collaborating, brainstorming, working as teams, working as
Oh my
clients.
God. Yeah. So stonewalling, I think for the younger members of the audience is kind of like ghosting, right? And so we use that term in negotiations, but basically it's just digging your heels in and just saying, oh, hell no. But you're not
Mhm.
actually telling them, oh, hell no. You're just behaving in an oh, hell no sort of way. And so it can be in the form of ghosting and not responding to emails or Slack messages, or in negotiations, always skirting and diverting around the conversation, never being able to actually reach an agreement. And when you're actually managing up, what I notice around stonewalling is a lot of managers may not have either the information or the authority to make a decision and give you the reasoning, but they're not going to tell you that. So then they just stonewall you by like kicking you off the calendar and kicking you 2 weeks off. And in my world, that's a really big deal when you've got a contract that needs to be executed and you need that stakeholder to sign off on it, and they're just not willing to do it, but they're not willing to communicate with you what and why they're not willing to do it. And so they just end up looking like a prick.
Yeah, and I want to note for the stonewalling, Jeanette, you're from the Midwest originally.
I am
And
from
one of the
Chicago.
things that we run into is either the Midwest nice and being very, very nice and very, very polite, or in the South, bless your heart,
Bless your heart.
Or here in the Pacific Northwest, which we have a strong and nationwide reputation of being amazingly passive aggressive, which just means
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to, this is how I define it. I may not tell you because maybe I
Yeah.
don't feel safe with you, but I am going to talk with people that I feel safe and comfortable with. So
And
we have
gossip.
different ways of avoiding. Yeah,
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, no, and when you're passive aggressive, you're gossiping because you'd rather go talk to the people you feel comfortable about why you're uncomfortable with whatever the situation is, but you then fake smile when the person that you have the disagreement with comes down the hallway. It's horrible. And that whole fake nice, oh my God, it's a tyranny with some people because they avoidant personality disorders, they can really like take it to the next level where everyone's like, oh, Sally Sue is such a nice person. But then you realize like Sally Sue can't get off her rock and do anything. Oh, but
Mm.
she's just so nice. So we never go to her and tell her everything she does is later. Everything's got mistakes in it, or I have to redo half of it because Sally Sue is so nice. And it's a tyranny. It drives me insane. And the Chicago part of me is just like, listen, I didn't vote 5 times for this. Like this is so Seattle, right? We had to vote 5 times to then unfund a monorail, which our town desperately needs public transportation. In Chicago, I'm like, I didn't vote for anything. I didn't vote for the orange line, but I sure as hell paid for it. So I don't understand this whole idea that we have to like dance around stuff. Like
Okay,
sometimes you
tell me
get
how
a
you
vote
really
and
feel about
sometimes you
it.
don't get
Tell
a
me how
vote.
you really feel about it.
Exactly.
So I think that's a great example of a couple of different things. One is that we do this stuff for a living. We talk about interests and issues, and we have frameworks, and we have tools, and we have language that we use, but it still gets under our skin. And I think kind of recognizing our own interests and issues and values and what annoys us and drives us crazy, um, I just want to put that out there. It doesn't mean that our worlds are conflict free. It just means
No.
that we have tools, and sometimes I have to pause and take a breath and say, okay, what do I want to have happen here? And I think
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was the folks over at Crucial Conversations add the thing in the long run. So we're
Yeah,
taking
yeah.
kind of a broader approach, but sometimes it's like I've got a 12-year-old kid, and I will tell you, he will say with my husband, you don't always do what you teach. I'm like, well, maybe not. And I know how to recover it.
Oh,
And
oh yeah,
I've
yeah,
built
but
up trust
you're not
in
my
relationships.
equal, sweet 12-year-old, just like my 14-and-a-half-year-old's not my equal. And so, as one of our common friends says, this is a benevolent dictatorship. Be grateful it's benevolent
Yeah.
at home. And that's a really interesting point because that's something that mediation does that negotiation doesn't do. So, mediation puts people temporarily on a level playing field, employee and manager, and provides the framework for the conversation, but then the employee then goes back to being the employee, just the way my daughter will always be my daughter, your son will always be your son, right? So you can
Mhm.
sometimes have parity in conversations, but then we live in a hierarchical society right now. And so if I'm your manager, then I have greater visibility into issues, greater delegated authority, greater responsibilities, thinking for other people besides just you on the team, and that gets lost in mediation. But in negotiation and customer supplier relationships, I'm actually bringing the lesser party also up, and it could be the supplier or the customer depending on who I'm working with, to try to level that playing field. But in my work, I want them to stay there.
Mm.
I want them
It's
to be
interesting.
partners.
Yeah, and I think in like employment realms, we're talking about either problem solving or collaborating. Your point earlier about that, you didn't say this explicitly, but there may not be the skill to have the conversation. They may not have been trained. They don't know. They may not have authority. They may not feel safe. There may be decisions made that they're not at liberty to be able to share.
Exactly.
and the employer always remains the employer. The manager always remains the employer. So in that, what I try to do kind of in mediation or collaboration, or even in coaching conversations, of how can you be more empowered to be able to have a back and forth conversation that's kind of designed in mind that there's an ongoing relationship, but also kind of address how we've irritated each other, how we felt each other getting in each other's way, or we're on our last nerve. And to kind of highlight your point, is the manager is always the manager. So even at that table, there are still power dynamics going on, and managers or management are not going to surrender any rights that they have in an informal process. It's like, let's talk about how the work gets done, but kind of overall rights and responsibilities remain fairly fixed. And those are the things
Yeah.
that I think we both look at. And even if you're at a brainstorming or collaboration, or even a Zoom or a Teams, informal meeting, being aware of like, what are the needs? What are the interests? What do I know about people, to be able to bring that forward in a way that feels productive and not like bending them over a barrel. And then that's kind of where that's the meat of where you and I and people who are really good at facilitating and collaborating, they're trying to identify what the needs, what the interest, what the values are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then try to have people articulate it in a safe way. But a lot of times people don't know. And even their needs and values are consistently inconsistent. They might be internally competing. So what I think you and I have similar things of, what do we look for to kind of say, okay, what are clashes of needs and interests and values? What kind of things do you look for that says, we know that it's going on, but what do we look for to manifest it, so that way we can kind of bring it forward as a topic, or as a reality check or a curiosity question?
So I have two strains of thought. So pick which one you want to go down. One is how you and I in particular use each other and other professionals to help us think through these more complicated situations. And then what I actually look for when my negotiation conversations, I can see them starting to spiral into areas of true disagreement. So which path do you want to go down?
I like the spiraling, because it reminds me of like
Okay.
the sucking vortex of pissed off. And also, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it drives into the emotional content. And not to throw anybody under the bus, but I remember sitting at, the Ram Eatery, sitting down, having lunch, talking to somebody, Jeanette, and looking across the table. And I said, you realize you're like spiraling, right? And you're getting
Yeah,
tighter and
yeah.
tighter and tighter. And you said, no. And I want to go there, but I don't want to completely throw you under the bus, but I think it is amazing and so important to cultivate relationships where within parameters you get to know each other enough that someone can mirror back. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
judging you, but are you
Right.
noticing about your
Right.
level of intensity? It seems to increase about that. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that people shy away from and start being nicey nice. So I would love to hear about
Yeah.
the vortex.
Yeah, and we've had several conversations with each other where we've been really frank, where your buzzword is like, Jeanette, you're starting to spiral again, because I'll get really wrapped up in a negotiation and how someone's not giving me data, or someone's being rude or bluffing, or and I really don't want it to go down the road of fraud, and so I'm getting tighter, like you said, and tighter, and I'll call you and you're like, whoa, you're spiraling, take a step back, and then like likewise, I've often told you, wait, you're getting totally caught up in your client's gears. Your clothes are in their gears, and that's why you're stuck. You have to take yourself out of it, loosen up those gears, be able to see it from a different perspective so that they can start to function again and reconnect. And the thing that I look for, and you and I both do this with each other, with our clients, is the really absurd, the ridiculous, the thing in the back of your mind, you're like, you didn't really just say that, did you? You really didn't threaten that. You really are not having a meltdown. I mean, I saw my client at a web meeting. She was present physically in the room with some people, and then I was over the web, and she became so agitated. I was talking about key performance metrics. Like, I wasn't actually like talking about anything personal, but about, because it triggered how much more work she still had to do to get ready for this contract. And she literally pushed herself back from the table and stood up and threw a temper tantrum, a full on 55-year-old temper tantrum.
Mm.
And I couldn't be there, so I couldn't immediately call a break and go over to her and start reframing. I'm really sensing a lot of resistance to talking about these key performance metrics. I'm sensing that this isn't something you're prepared to do today. How can we? But what you and I do is we start with the I'm sensing and reframing it. Because what happened is that she started talking in front of the camera to somebody else, distracting all of us and all the work that we were trying to do. And it was really clear that she was having a temper tantrum. And people are like suddenly studying the paper in front of them, you know, with the highlighter, and they're like suddenly super focused on what is in front of them
Yeah,
because they were
nothing's
so
going on here.
uncomfortable.
Nothing's going on
Right.
here. Don't worry about that. Yeah.
Because they were so uncomfortable with this temper tantrum. And you and I start using those sensing words because people will push back on us. No, I'm not. And then you start another way. Oh, okay. So you're not frustrated. I'm sensing that you're not prepared, you know, because you couldn't actually give me, you know, I would say it nicer, but the metric I
Mhm.
was asking for. And you and I just really start to work. It's like there's a knot, and you and I just very patiently, lovingly, compassionately start to unwind it. But when you and I see a knot, we go to the knot. We're like, oh, knot. Let's go
Yeah.
and where other people are focusing on the papers in front of them and highlighting things and making sure that all of their focus is in front of them and that there is nothing else going on. There is no knot, no elephant in the room, no, this 55-year-old executive is not having a temper tantrum.
Yeah, and I do think like because sometimes I would say like it may come across loving or compassionate, but we're like, son of a gun, I'm going after that thing right now.
That's true.
And and I do think that because both you and I are kind of outside, and this is kind of like the benefit of someone outside coming in is like we minimize getting caught up in the gears and we provide a perspective and we're conscientious of the political dynamics, but at the end of the day, we get to leave. So we're able to kind of speak truth to power, say, hey, I'm noticing this, I'm sensing this is going on. And so I think that that is a benefit because I don't know how much social, what's the word? Oh,
Pro
I
social
need another
behavior, social
no,
currency,
like social capital, like how much political and
capital,
social
yeah.
capital people are willing to expend or how safe it is they
Yes,
do it. Or
yes,
it's like, I love talking to people like, well, I'm just retiring, so I'm going to lay it out. Why? Because I got nothing to lose.
that's right.
And so
That's
that's
right.
a way to be able to do it, but being able to, even if we're like, oh, because it's a little bit like moths to a light of ding 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 ding
Yeah,
ding,
absolutely.
this is my entryway in. And I look at that if there are very high or very low levels of emotion, that tells me that there's something important going on, and I'm curious about
Exactly.
that, like what's happening about this, and like keywords and key phrases about something. And I always say, that I look for things that are symbolically significant or emotionally significant, because chances are that's why it's a big deal. And chances are that's why they're wrapped around their own axle to
Yeah.
be able
Yeah.
to do it.
So younger folks call them triggers now, like I'm being triggered, and it's, I think, overused, but yeah, but that executive who threw the temper tantrum was triggered by what was going on. And I didn't have judgment about it other than I noticed A, what was happening, B, that she was now talking with somebody else, not including the rest of us that were on the call or in the room, that people were in the room were uncomfortable, etc. And you start to notice those things. And so for younger folks that are listening to this, what the word that might come to your mind is she was triggered. And then when we see those triggers, then we want to be able to understand, well, what's being triggered, and is there a resolution to that trigger? Because people's emotional outbursts literally can shut down and derail the conversation. Whether it's a mediation or a contract negotiation, I have seen emotion derail conversations.
Yeah, I was working with a coaching client yesterday, and she had just mentioned that there was a certain word that really just gets her back up, and I think we all have those. And I think one of the things that we do is we kind of, whether it's in caucus, which is a private conversation, in mediation, or for negotiation, it's like behind closed doors, or if it's a facilitation or a training, we're trying to get people of what makes it a big deal for you, and why is that? Because we're trying to figure out, going back to the little mediation training here, Jeanette, that we look at what makes long-lasting settlements, or what makes longer-lasting agreements,
Right.
we use the lingo of what gets people to buy in, or I just say what gets people to follow through with stuff they agreed
Right.
to. And I going in the Wayback Machine. Do you remember like the 3 levels of satisfaction that I love your face. Okay, so this is a pop quiz. There are 3 levels of satisfaction for durable agreements, and it talks about that there has to be substantive satisfaction, and there has to be emotional satisfaction and procedural satisfaction. So substantive is like, it's tangible. What do they want to get out of this meeting? So it might be like, we want an agreement about X, or a process, or an agreement to terms. And then procedural satisfaction is, I felt it was an equitable process. I felt as though we had equitable participation, which I view as like, did the structure of the process and how the process was executed make you feel as though you had the opportunity to talk about what you needed to talk about and agree to, attempt to agree to what you needed to agree to. And then the last one is like the emotional, of like, whatever emotional things we were bringing toward this, is that resolved to some type of level? And I also say in my media, it's like, I hope whatever emotional baggage you brought to this, that you can set that down and move forward with your life. So it's along the example that I was taught, and I think this might do it, is like, if you want to go to a restaurant, you want like a good quality meal at a good price and good service. So the meal is the substantive, the service is the process. And I think I'm getting it mixed up. Okay, what did I say? So the price is like the
emotional. Is that the emotional part?
I think it's more
it's
substantive, because you want a meal, but the price you want to pay. The service is the process, and oh God, I need more coffee. Okay, there we go. So let me backtrack and just say, if any one of those is off, you're going to go, well, it was a good meal, but it was too pricey. So the meal might be the process, and the price was a substantive. Or you could say it was a great meal, great company, beautiful restaurant, and the service
sucked.
So we do all of that in our life, and it's just a lens. And so sometimes when I'm preparing for conversations, I'm looking at how can I address what people need? How can I design and execute a process where they feel it's equitable? And what kind of emotions are people bringing? What kind of emotions prop up? And how can we kind of get some level of feeling as though we're moving through those sticky things, so people aren't getting stuck in, the vortex of pissed off or anger or resentment or disappointment or, so those types of things. And I'm sorry I couldn't articulate it better. But do you go
ahead. I wanted to talk about this one time when I called you because of, so again, in my household, I set up a process that my daughter and her best friend on a cabin camping trip had to go through. And I called you and you're like, it's not about the cheese, Jeanette. It's not
Oh,
about the cheese.
let's just pause because there was a setup. You did the setup. You know, it was like going the background. It wasn't at the event. It's like, let's go back 3 days before the camp out. And by the way, that's one thing I always look at for conflict resolution of where does the story start for the person and how long
Yeah.
is it? And then you're like,
Yeah.
and she melted down and it was
She
just
so
crazy.
did.
It was about the cheese. And I just said, it's not about the cheese. So can
Right.
you kind of set that story up for folks? So
Yeah.
give an example of interest
Yeah,
and interest and
exactly.
also what we look for about
Yeah.
conflict.
So this had to have been 2017, maybe the summer of 2018. This was before COVID. And I went to a cabin for a super long weekend. I think it was at least 5 days over with a Saturday and Sunday with my daughter, who would have been, 11 at the time, and her best friend, Vivian. And I was trying to teach my daughter, so I thought, what it would mean to be a good hostess. And so, as much as I could, I was trying to be gracious to Vivian. And so, would serve Vivian first with pancakes, or, like, what, how you cut things and kids want to, choose which side gets cut, which of the cut they get, like if there's a cake or something
Yeah.
like that. And so then Vivian started getting in the habit of like grabbing first because she was the guest, and she was, feeling very loved and very gracious on this. This was the longest time that she was going to be with us as a guest, not just as an overnight or something like that. And at the very last day, I set out all of the sandwich making, and we were going to get packed and check out, but I set all the sandwich making things out on the countertop and told the girls, go make your sandwiches, and there's chips, blah, 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 grapes, whatever, I'm being mom. And yeah, my daughter just absolutely loses it because Vivian takes the last slice of American cheese. Now, there was other cheese, but she took the last slice of American cheese, and that's really what my daughter wanted. So I pulled my daughter off to the side, like, what is going on? And why are you having this huge reaction? And I'm having a reaction as a mom. I need to get out of this cabin by a certain time. And Vivian's just like, how did you turn into a demon? As she's eating her sandwich with the last slice of American cheese. And so I call you a couple of days later and I'm like, hey, do you have time to talk? And so I tell you about this whole long story. And you just kept saying, it's not about the cheese, right? It's not about the cheese. And because I was in such a mom space and not in my negotiation headspace or my mediation headspace, I was like, no, it was about the cheese. Like, my daughter was rude and just lost her mind about cheese. And you're like, no, she actually didn't. And so we had this phenomenal conversation. This is why we need other people that we can talk to who are safe, who can sort of reel us back in and say, okay, get out of mom headspace, look at this more neutrally as a conflict and what had happened. And that's really what you helped me see, is what was going on that would cause my daughter to just absolutely flip out and always being second on this, what was supposed to be super fun cabin camping trip.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about that. There was kind of like the autonomy, and then also, I mean, that was such a
Yeah,
rich
very much so.
conversation. One, because you were upset, and I was laughing and losing, and just like it's not about the cheese. And going back to things like my more teacher thing is like the cheese is symbolically significant of something else. And you and I talked about this, about what type of assumptions and protocols are we imposing upon people,
Imposing.
and how that can cause conflict and resentment and explosiveness, and then also how people react to it. So that's kind of one of the things that I think we do, and the importance of having anybody who can listen. And I mean, it's not that we don't judge people, because we do judge people, but we kind of suspend commentary until people get a chance to talk through what's important, and we can be compassionate, and we also can like raise the it's not about the cheese, or we know each other well enough, or if people have mentors or somebody outside of their of the circle that's going to advise? We don't need advice and judgment, but is there someone who can say, I'm kind of calling you on this. I'm going to be direct. I know enough about you that I can see how your approach probably was an ingredient in this mixture. And I think that's one of the things that, any type of problem solver does, is like, what are the personalities and the approaches? How are they adding to the mix? And how did we get there? Because it's generally not a one-time transaction, at work or negotiation. There is a history, and we are learning and thinking people, and we bring all of that history and our own bias and our own goals and our own BS to
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
great. I think we're doing just fine. So I'm kind of curious. Uh, one thing that I had talked to you about, uh, you know, it's like, how do we debrief conversations? Because I think that's one thing about the tribe. The tribe is not only do we go through and prepare for conversations, but I'm kind of curious, like, how you help your clients if there has been intense talk and people are kind of frustrated or reacting. When I was teaching you and others mediation, whatever step model we had, 3-step, 5-step, 12-step, whatever, the last was always the debrief that allowed the mediator to emotionally process what was happening, to think, what do I want to repeat? What kind of didn't meet my expectation in a good environment? And so that way it was a way for us to emotionally close out that time so we don't continue living in that intense place. How do you work
Yep.
with your
Yeah.
clients, or how do you actually kind of mentally, emotionally, procedurally debrief?
So the more complex the contract, the more complex the negotiations, we're always debriefing and prepping in tandem. So we're always getting done with a conversation. Sometimes these things take all day, and we might get on a call for just 20 minutes and just say, hey, how did that go? What did we accomplish? Did we get everything accomplished we had hoped to get accomplished? What's still outstanding? And then as we start to prep for the next conversation, which might be 2 days from now or next week, then we're still debriefing what had happened in the previous conversation as part of the preparation for the next conversation. And they're not as structured as what you and I did at the Pierce County Center for Dispute Resolution, where there was a little bit more of a formula and we had papers that we tended to fill out and things like that that helped. It's more informal because sometimes we have to bring leadership in when it's been a really difficult conversation and things have gone off the rails. Sometimes we'll have to get like the chief procurement officer if I'm on the procurement side, or the VP of sales if I'm on the sales side, to explain what happened and what our plan is to get it back on track if we should, get it back on track. So those are it's more fluid than a mediation where there's a definitive end. And then sometimes we have a little bit of a celebration after a contract is signed. We might all get on a call and, have a virtual cheers coffee anymore these days because we don't do this in person, just to say congratulations, it's been executed, and we all, appreciate everyone's time and energy and effort.
Got it. I'm also thinking about, like, for you, after you've done all of that, how do you emotionally debrief? Because I remember when when you and I were both mediating at the Center for Dispute Resolution, or even like when I'm working on site with a client, I love the drive home with the radio turned off. And it's just like, it's a psychological distancing, and it's kind of an emotional processing. And I'm going to highlight the reason why I don't put the radio or things on. It's because my brain just needs to be able to not take any more input in. And sometimes I remember that I've called you. I'm remembering specifically a mediation for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that I did. So it was kind of post complaint of harassment discrimination, and it didn't resolve. And I called you up and I said, how do you negotiate with people who don't know how to negotiate? And your great answer was,
Yeah.
don't. It's just really hard. But that was my process of being able to emotionally and psychologically distance, but also kind of what went on for that. And it's still something that I do, and I try to ritualize it, because I think anyone who is in intense or substantial conversations, we tend to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And no wonder we're burnt out, because we don't have transition. And I think the mediation training, we tend to ritualize that so it becomes habit, and we see that it's significant. So any suggestions for
It's
folks out there?
Yeah, the transitions are terrible now, especially post-COVID with meetings, because I can have a 4-hour negotiation, followed by maybe 30 minutes if I've scheduled it, some sort of a break. And then I'm with another client and I might be mentoring them to prepare for yet a whole different negotiation, a different set of facts. And so the way that I emotionally debrief is, you are a member of my tribe, and I have a very good personal friend who's now the chief procurement officer at a very large company, and he lives here in Seattle. And the two of us talk smack. And so everything is like totally on the up and up. We don't talk to each other about anything we're not supposed to talk about, so we don't use names and specificities and things like that. But like, I can just say, like, to your point, like, how do you negotiate with someone who doesn't know how to negotiate? I can just say, how the heck do you run a negotiation when your senior leadership has delayed a gate review process 3 times and they have not given you the decision you need, and you've got these 4 suppliers that are crawling all over you saying, you're off your schedule, we thought we'd hear by now, have we been advanced to the next stage? And I'm waiting for the stakeholder to try to give me the down selection approval to move forward with a supplier, and they're not doing it. And so, we could just talk smack, these people are all idiots and they don't know what they're doing. And of course, they're not idiots, and of course they know what they're doing, and there are things we don't know, but it just is that sense of release, that we could just sort of talk to each other. Or he'll call me up and like, this is a good one. And I always know I need to like sit down if I'm like standing in the kitchen or something, sit down and listen, because it is going to be a good story. So you do have to have the people in your life that you can emotionally process, because I learn from him, he learns from me, I learn from you, you learn from me. And so it isn't just, a vomit session. We actually do get to a place where he says, well, have you thought that this stakeholder, blah, 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 because you told me 2 months ago about this division changing. And I was like, oh, that's right. That's probably holding it up. Okay, let me go back with better questions to the stakeholder. What do you need from our team? Because I'm always in the mentoring situation, so sometimes I can have a greater voice. And then, he'll learn from me. He sent a bunch of stuff over to me and said, can you please review it? As an external consultant, give me some advice on how to handle it. And there's some talking smack in between, the advice, but you just have to have somebody that you could just say, like, these people made me pull my hair out.
Yeah. So, along the lines of a ritualized way of bringing closure to it, I want to say, Jeanette, thank you. I
Thank
always learn
you.
from you. I enjoy talking with you. And I also think that even in the most difficult situations, we always have a little bit of a laugh. So thank you. I really appreciate you
Thank you
sharing
for
your
having me.
time and your knowledge with us. And have a great day. And I encourage anybody that if you're interested in negotiation, Niden on Negotiation is a podcast. If you want more tips, tricks, techniques for conflict resolution, you can go to managingconflict.com and sign up for a conflict tip of the day, or follow me on LinkedIn, where someone named me one of the top 30 people to follow on conflict resolution. And I wish you well and start increasing those conflict resolution muscles so you can become more of a superhero in your own life.